This meeting is now called to order. I'm Charlie Gazik, Chair of the Planning Commission, and we are beginning our July 26th meeting with flag salute. Will you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please? I pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Clerk Pro Tem, will you call the roll?
Commissioner Marsh.
Here.
Commissioner Quigg is coming late. Commissioner Danzler is excused. Commissioner Lowe.
Here.
Commissioner Van Atta.
Here.
Vice Chair Kennard, also not here. Chair Getzek.
Present.
Okay.
And if there's no objection, we will note that the two commissioners, Kennard and Danzler, are absent with excuse. Brings us to the agenda approval. You've received copies of the agenda. Are there any revisions? Okay, seeing none, we'll please show the final agenda approved without objection. Next is the approval of meetings of two of our past meetings. We'll begin with the meeting of April 26th. Draft minutes were distributed before the meeting. Are there any amendments to the minutes as presented? Seeing no objections, we'll consider the minutes of the April 26th meeting approved. The meeting of the 28th of June was also distributed. Are there any amendments to those minutes? And there are no objections, so we will consider those approved as well. We'll now open the public comment period. There's no one here in City Hall chambers. Is there anybody online? No? Then we will close the public comment period. Commissioners, this is your opportunity to comment. Would anybody like to make a comment before we move on to other business?
I just wanted to note that I was at the city council meeting last week, and there were a number of items that came up that I thought were really relevant to what we are doing here. There was a traffic plan, there was a parks plan, there was some comment by Carol Simpson, which I thought was really relevant and important regarding some traffic concerns that she had noted. And just I thought there was some interesting content there that, even though it wasn't specific to the comp plan, I mean, it just really reinforced the importance of what we're doing, how integral this revision is going to be for the city.
Any other comments? All right. Our first report is from the chair, and I will say a few words about the Arts Fair, or I should say about our table at the Arts Fair, where we tried out some public engagement tools for the first time. It was a really fun and successful day, I think. I know two other commissioners present were there, and I think they would likely second my comments, but the penny poll went over really well with the public. People really enjoyed taking that poll, and we got a lot of participation. The two most popular items were walkable downtown and road safety and maintenance. And the least chosen item as a priority was abundant parking, which surprised me given that we often hear complaints about parking in Newcastle. The handouts that we had prepared to kind of spark conversation turns out weren't needed, and we didn't really use them. Conversation came pretty natural, and people had things to say. The business cards, or the cards that are sort of like business cards that had a place, where an email address where people could send further comments. We handed out several of those, so that was a good thing. We're making two changes in the penny poll for future events, starting with tonight. One of them is to change the category that we were calling Housing Jobs Balance. We're going to change that category name to Attracting New Business, since many people asked, where is that? And it was in the description, but it just didn't stand out with the title, so a small change there. And then there were folks that said, what about public safety as an issue? And that's not really an issue of the comprehensive plan. But to the general public being asked, what are your priorities? To have that not be there seemed to be kind of odd and not in the spirit of, responding to what members of the public might want to express an opinion about. And there's at least one other category on our penny poll that isn't really part of the comprehensive plan too, which I think is civic engagement. So we're going to add that for the categories going forward. We've got 4 concerts now coming up, one tonight, and then we have Newcastle Days, and we still need to fill some slots there. We discovered that it was really good to have 2 commissioners there at one time, because there was often a press of people, and that way we could take advantage of the interest that people gave when they came by. That's not always going to be possible, especially I think on Newcastle Days, which is an all-day event. We're not going to be able to do that. But to the extent that you have time, I encourage you all to be there whenever you can. An hour goes by really fast, and the commissioners at the Arts Fair enjoyed it so much that many stayed longer, and 2 hours went by really, just as fast. It was just, it's really interesting and fun. So that is my report. We will any questions on that? Or any comments from those who were there?
I'd actually comment from being there. First of all, I want to echo everything that you said, Charlie. It was a really great readout on that. And my 2 hours ended up turning into 3 hours, and it was really great. I had a really good time. And one of the things I wanted to note as well that I thought was super interesting and actually really exciting as part of the Planning Commission and being part of the city government is there were quite a few people who walked up that had been here for 25, 30 years, had lived in Newcastle since before it was Newcastle, right? And you heard a lot of that and had some really specific feelings and really specific input. And then I was surprised at the number of people who were much younger, people who had lived here a year, people who had lived here 2 years or had moved here from, Pioneer Square because they wanted to be someplace different than right in the heart of the city. And it was interesting, the mix of people that we had that showed up. And it really made me feel good about what we're doing being out at those tables, because I was initially worried we were just going to get, one small kind of subset of the population. And it really did, in my view, reflect a broad sort of swath of the folks who live in Newcastle. So it definitely worth doing at any of the future events that you can.
Can I comment real quick? I honestly don't remember what I signed up for.
I brought the sign-up sheet, and I'll pass it around so you can see what you signed up for.
Okay. And then as far as Newcastle Days goes, I'm around all day, so I can, work it as much as you need.
Great.
Yeah, I also want to echo what Charlie mentioned. It was very successful day. Oh, sorry. I think it's also tied into the Arts Fair Day. I think I feel summer weather is good, and also those activities we probably will get a lot of turnout. Actually, it was much more turnout than I expected, and I also noticed they're almost like half residents versus just visitors. So in another way, it also makes you wonder, there is not just residents, but there are also something attracted people to stop by, either the events or something else. So it was a very successful event.
Okay, Director Hoffman.
Thank you, Chair. A lot going on right now, but I'll focus and reserve time for the actual items on the agenda. But I wanted to provide one update related to comp plan, the town hall. There was discussion at the last meeting about availability and timing. Tomorrow at 1 o'clock, staff meets with SCJ, and we begin to have that discussion and update you on potential dates, what the topics would be, the format, and so forth. So I'll have more after tomorrow. We can take care of it by email. We don't need to wait till the next planning commission meeting. But tonight's update is the suggestion is highly likely to be a midweek evening instead of, to answer the initial question, which is weekend better than weekday or multiple meetings? So we're heading towards a suggestion that it would be a midweek town hall or open house in late September. And we're formulating 4 basic topics of what to accomplish in there. The format could be 2 presentations, one at 5, one at 6:30, to take advantage of a long time period for those that can make it right away or need to get off work and commute, but to have a productive night. And then there's also an online element. So we're going to flesh that out tomorrow and then update you by email, and then hopefully head towards selecting an actual evening in late September, hopefully, for which to complete this effort. Any suggestions or questions or? Okay, thank you.
Okay, we have no public hearings tonight. Brings us to general business. First item is the comp plan elements assignments, and the only item to report there were 2 elements that were unassigned at our last meeting, housing and utilities, and Commissioner Quigg has taken on housing, so I will take on utilities. So all of you who have had your assignments, that nothing has changed. And that brings us to probably the most meaty thing we have tonight, which is the housekeeping code revisions. And I will turn the floor over to Assistant Planner Coyle.
Thank you, Chair. You guys are probably already familiar with this. Every year we try to go through our code and look for typos, logical inconsistencies, things that should have been changed when other things were changed, and similarly minor issues in our plan or in our code, and clean them up. And these formed the housekeeping amendments that we try to do every year. This year we have 14 proposed, and so we're not expecting any fiscal impact for any of these. These are not major policy changes, or really even minor ones. They are just straightening out code. And so with that, so I'll make one other note as we go, or I've ordered these tonight so that we see them in the order of thematically, so that we can move through the discussion efficiently and that related topics will appear together. But for reference, when you see them in Exhibit 1, they are ordered as they will appear in code, so numerically, just because that can work a little bit better as a reference document down the line. So with that, I'll jump into it. So the first couple here, you may, some of you who were on commission last year may recognize these are ones that may have been discussed previously and didn't make it out of the code, or we found another, we removed part of it and found another piece. So we're just cleaning that up. So the first one is removing the limit on unrelated foster children in a foster home. Our code currently caps the number of foster children to 3 unrelated juveniles. This is regulated by the state, and it's really not appropriate for the city to be controlling this. And so we were proposing just to strip out that section of the code and say that a foster home would be defined as a home licensed and regulated by the state and classified by the state as foster home. And let the state handle what its role is to handle. All right. So the next one, and feel free to stop me if you have any questions, comments, or want to discuss. We were going to add a definition of mobile food facility. NMC 1823 repeatedly references mobile food facilities, but there is actually no definition of this in 1806. It actually was in a past code and a past version of the code and got removed. And so we were essentially putting it back in NMC 1806 389.2. We were going to add one that says mobile food facility, retail food establishment located in a vehicle, trailer, stand, or push cart, which sells food ready for consumption. And essentially plug that hole in the code. So the next one, staying on mobile food vending, there's a need to clarify the mobile food vending permitting requirements for sponsored event supply and mixed-use zones to match the spirit of the existing requirements. What this practically means is that food truck events or an event with food trucks happening in the commons should be regulated the same way as one happening downtown. And that was the spirit of past discussions. And so we were going to recommend adding mixed use to the list of zones in section C, joining NB, DT, and DC. So that would be neighborhood business, downtown transition, and downtown core. And yes, so that's just keeping with the spirit of what was already discussed in the current regulation.
I just have a quick question on that. So to understand, as it currently is, the permitting requirements, I guess I'm just trying to understand, does this expand the ability to have food trucks in the commons because they're mixed use, commercial, mixed use, residential, and mixed use? So is that a broader opportunity to have those in the commons as opposed to downtown, and it matches to what's in downtown?
Yes, so I believe that this will make it a little bit easier to have permitted or food trucks with permitted events in the commons. It won't make it, general presence of food trucks won't be allowed there, as it is not anywhere. But it should make event permitting a little bit easier.
If I can clarify, it's in the spirit of the original restriction on the downtown zone. It's just that the actual MU use accidentally did not make it in the code.
Thank you.
And for the director, the clarification would be that I don't have to call mixed use residential, even though it allows residential, delineates which one of the MU would fall in.
All right, so the next one is who can submit for a text amendment. So it currently reads that amendments to this text of this title may be initiated by City Council, Planning Commission, staff, or petitions submitted by a citizen. Last year, it was agreed that a citizen would get changed to person withstanding, and a definition was added in NMC 1806-452 defining person withstanding as a resident of the city of Newcastle, owner of a business physically located in Newcastle, or a person who owns real property in Newcastle. So the definition made it in there, but the word citizen remained, I think, because of a Scrivener's error. And so we were going to clean that on up and make it consistent. So the next one, removing paper copy references and binding site plan applications. We have tried to remove all of our code requirements that require paper references. The city no longer favors taking them in. It's not that we would necessarily refuse a paper copy, but it's not something that we really want at this point. And there is just a large number of references, and this one fell through the cracks. So we are going to add it to the list of paper copy references that we have removed. So the next one is wireless communications facilities submittal requirements. So in our wireless communications facilities application, or in our submittal requirements in NMC 1825-070 right now, it provides a complete list of everything that you need to submit to have a, quote, complete WC application. And by complete, it means that we can move on to noticing. The issue with that being complete is that we require as a general practice, we require a master land use application for any land use permit. It's basic information about the project and contact information from the person or the applicant, that sort of thing. The code as written doesn't actually give us the ability to require that for completion. And so we're kind of stuck with asking for it, recommending that we get it. We don't have the code basis. And so we wanted to add at the end of that section 9, a master land use application and other information specified and requested on the application form to the list of things required for completeness. All right. So now we're going to hit a couple of these with a kind of rhyming theme here about things that are called variances that are like variances but not variances. So the first one of these would be change public work quote variances to deviations in 1205005. So variance is a specific land use term with legal ramifications and a specific policy that is defined, or a specific process that is defined in Title 19. Public works, applications to change public works standards do not follow this process. Their process is completely different. It's not beholden to Title 19 at all. And so just to make it clearer to an applicant, we wanted to change the word variance to deviations, which is a common term in the field. And we think that this would just make it a little bit more straightforward for applicants. For example, a couple months ago, I had a short plat applicant that started talking about going through like a Title 19 variance process because of deviation from road standards that they're looking for. And that is completely not what we need to make that change happen there. It's the wrong person, it's the wrong process. And so we thought that just changing variances to definition, or changing variances to deviations in 1205 would clarify this.
I'll ask another quick question. And I don't remember seeing this when I reviewed the materials before, but does staff think that the use of the introduction of the term deviation here, is there sufficient understanding in common usage in this particular industry that it doesn't require statutory definition, or is it defined somewhere else that isn't necessarily copied in the excerpts you gave? Or I guess I'm asking, do we need to define the term deviation? I'm not sure we do. I just wonder your thoughts.
It's a good topic. I would pose it as the other way around. Variance, as used, is codified in RCW. So by going away from that, we're solving that problem. A deviation is more specific to our code. It's a flexibility. And it tends to be administrative. It tends to be ministerial. It doesn't have a defined, codified set of findings. And so it would exist for meaning in the section it's in. Whereas if you spin it around, variance is very much, an RCW and then our code-specific findings. So if in the planning world, we're using the word variance, that's what that implies, where the intent of using deviation is more of a common term when you're reviewing a lower level discretionary permit or proposal. So it'd be harder to then do what you suggest for the word deviation without creating the problem going back the other way, because it exists in a variety of forms. And it's specific to the chapter and section that it's called out for.
And I guess one minor thing to add would just be that the word deviations is used in the field and in the industry. So this name is not just, or this word isn't pulled out of the hat.
And I appreciate everything you all said, and I certainly am not implying that at all. I wasn't, and again, I'm not proposing this, I just didn't know if perhaps I think what I'm hearing you say is there is enough common understanding based on field use that there's not ambiguity by introducing the term deviations here, that it would require definition in the code. And that's fine, I just was curious your thought on that. So that's helpful, thank you.
So this other one here is really just a continuation of the previous one. The first one was in 1205.005. This is in 1205.080. It is just another place where variations came up, or variances came up in the code. So it's really the exact same discussion as the past one.
If I could throw one thing in there, see if I captured the thought. So the word variance has both the RCW codified meaning and then the common English language meaning, which is to deviate. And so the distinction between the two is to not have an intent to codify and specify deviation, but have it mean its common English language meaning.
We're using it to make the point that where previously the common used variance term here, there was confusion because it was being construed as how it's defined in the code. I got you. Great, thanks.
So staying on the topic of changing variances to something else, we have surface water design adjustment request process in NMC 1828050C. The code right now refers to that as it calls it a variance again. And variance is not, again, that's not at all the process that applications to get a change from the King County Surface Water Design Manual go through. And the manual actually uses the term adjustments. That is the accepted standard there. And so to use variance here is confusing and inaccurate. And so we were going to change the word variance here to adjustment to match what you would find in the manual, and also to specify that the process here is not the Title 19 process. Because if you go into Title 19 right now, you'll see variances in there, and then you can follow that to a very specific process that is a lot more intensive than how an adjustment to the manual would go. And so it kind of leads you astray. So the next one here is requiring binding site plan approval for engineering review permit and site development standards. Right now, if say you get a preliminary plat and you want to go through like a subdivision process, you have to get your preliminary your preliminary plat approved before you can start the engineering review permit. which logically makes sense because you have to know what you're generally doing before you can specifically implement the infrastructure. Our code right now does not mention binding site plans, though. And the issue is that binding site plans are really quite similar conceptually to what you need to do in a subdivision. So say you're building a group of townhouses that are coming together in like a condo finance format. That's going to require a binding site plan. And aside from that, it's going to look and feel pretty similar to a subdivision. You're going to need to get your preliminary approval. You're going to need to get your infrastructure installed, an engineering review, and then get recorded and go. And so this this change here would just change the code to state that binding site plans need to have that first approval before they go into engineering review, just for logical consistency. This is how we would require it to be done right now, so it's not really changing anything. It's just changing the wording here so that so that we don't have to cite other pieces of code and kind of piece together the argument of why we have to do the logical thing. So the next one, requiring engineering review permits for binding site plan and subdivision code. This is the same idea, just one step further in the process. So our code right now says that if you are, we'll bring up the example of a subdivision again. So if you're building on a land or on a piece of land that is undergoing a subdivision, and it's got its preliminary approval, but it hasn't been recorded yet, and you apply for a building permit on that land, you don't get to use the future lot's definition until you can only use the present lot. If you do then apply, you're essentially canceling the land use application because you can only get approved you can only get approved based on the lot standards that exist at the time you're applying. That is already the case, would already be the case for a binding site plan, but we're just making the code a little bit clearer to say that you would also need a binding site plan to be approved, and that you would also need your binding site plan approved before you can go. So this next one, and we're getting near the end here. Clarifying streets and a planned unit development. This one is a little bit more complicated, but our code on planned unit developments right now essentially says that when it defines what you can apply or what rules you can apply to bend through the planned unit development process, that you cannot or that you have to dedicate your streets to Newcastle, and that you can't apply for a changed street standards through the PUD. But then it goes on to say that you can apply for those changes with the Public Works Department. And so what the code is getting at is that you can apply for changes to your street standards, but they have to come through that deviation process. They don't go through the PUD process. And we are going to reword it to clarify. So to say, streets within a PUD shall be dedicated to the city for public use. Nothing in this section shall prevent the applicant from requesting a deviation from the City of Newcastle Public Works standards. Alternatives to emirate turnarounds or cul-de-sacs are encouraged to minimize. And so the point there is just to get rid of the seemingly contradictory language that we have right now. That kind of says you can't apply to change this, but you can, and just makes it say that you can, but it goes through the deviations process, not through the PUD process. All right, so for this one, we're actually going to want your feedback and your input. So right now, our front lot line definition has it struggles a little bit on flag lots. I've drawn up here an example of a flag lot that is 50 by 120 and is entered from the side. So our code right now would require this front section right here to be the front lot line. The issue with that is that we've then got a 10-foot front setback and a 20-foot rear setback, but the lot only has to be 50 feet wide. So at this point, we've got 20 feet of buildable area there, which is encouraging a skinny, impractical house on a lot that is large enough that it does not really need to squish like that. Another thing that we're doing is that it's very typical in these flag lots to be kind of behind other normal street fronting lots that will be facing towards the public street. By orienting the flag lot in the same direction as the other ones, we're now putting someone's house staring into someone's backyard or garage, which is not really preferable for anyone. And so we were looking for two potential solutions to this problem. The first option would be to make your take your front setback 10 feet from the lot line on the narrower portion of the lot. Most lots have this kind of narrow rectangular layout with the narrow portion fronting the public right-of-way, and this would, to some extent, recreate that, and it would make the line, it would make the house fit a little bit more naturally into the lot. It would also have the benefit of allowing the house to, or making it easy for the house to not front the rear end of its neighbors. And so that this would work on pretty much any flag lot. There's another idea that you could think of as more of a wedge, where you essentially would push back into the lot a little bit, maybe 10 feet or so, and then draw a line from that point that you drew 10 feet into the buildable portion of the lot to the corner of the other side of your access drive. That could be a tract, easement, what have you. And that's your front lot line. And now your front setback is going 10 feet away from that, again, in that diagonal. And that one, you could say it allows a little bit more freedom for how the house is actually oriented. It keeps the house away from the start of the access, and it ultimately may give the builder a little bit more flexibility, but it's a little bit harder to define. It's a little bit less straightforward, and so I don't know that we were necessarily going to decide this tonight, but these were two possibilities that we wanted to put forth for your consideration.
So would it be fair to characterize these options that one of them is easy to explain but offers less flexibility to the builder, and one that offers more flexibility to the builder but is harder to explain?
I think that's fair.
I would put my trust in the staff to explain it to the builder and give them more flexibility. Commissioners?
I think that's a great point. I'm curious, I'm trying to understand what the balance of the setbacks would look like around the lot if we're defining the front of the lot in each of these two ways. Can you help me? So I assume that the back on option one, the back is the end, the narrow end down by the number 50, and there would be a 20-foot setback. What would be the side setbacks that would be required on that?
So our side setbacks for R4 and R6, which is the vast majority of our single-family zoning in Newcastle, have a minimum of 5 feet on any given side, but they have to add to at least 15 feet. So this gives the developer a little bit of flexibility. They can go 7.5, 7.5, or 5 and 10, or any combination thereof. Hypothetically, let's imagine that you get a 5-foot setback on the west and a 10-foot setback on the east. Those go straight down the line, or straight down the lot as parallel lines. And then you'd have the rear setback on the opposite side of the front lot line, and that's 20 feet. And that is always 20 feet. I'll also mention that we have one other setback requirement, which is 20 feet from the front lot line, or from the access point to a garage. This one is a little bit less important in the orientation of the house, but it's just another one to keep in mind. In option 2, I would believe that the 50-foot, that it would really go the same, that the 50-foot would be your rear lot line, with your setback 20 feet in from that. The one thing that's interesting is that if you have this angle, the impact of which side is 5 feet and which side is 10 feet changes your buildable area a little bit more. So if you go, so imagine if you have 5 feet on the west, those two setbacks are going to intersect, right? So the smaller your setback is on the slanted side of the wedge, the more buildable area you would ultimately have as the developer. I don't know that it would meaningfully change it, but I guess that is something to note, that it's pushing it back in both directions. So if you do the 10-foot setback on the west side, then you're just, you've cut off a little bit more area. So I guess you can make a case that there's a slight incentive to put your small setback along the wedge, but I don't know that it would really be yielding enough land for a developer to care.
And then, I appreciate all that. On the option 2, then the remaining portion of the property line that we haven't talked about along the top opposite 50 Colton North End. So what would be the designated setback there?
Well, the nice thing is that in our code, anything that's not a front or a back is a side. And so that would be another minimum 5. So it is covered, but it's not, it is covered, it's just a little bit more implicitly covered. And that is something that we would catch in our review, but may require explanation to the developer. The one thing I'll just make sure that it's a minimum of 5, so you can't, and if the side setbacks are adding to 15, I don't think we would encourage an interpretation that says we're gonna do like 6, 6, and 6. We would still want the 2 traditional sides to add the 5, and then this third side here could be another 5.
So on the option 2, you could arguably have 5 feet across the front, 5 feet across the top, and then 10 feet on the back, or whatever works. Got it. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So either one of these are probably viable, but
Okay, another quick question. On option 1, the front setback is like in the middle of the 20-foot driveway. I'm assuming that whoever builds a house here would put a garage maybe towards the front setback? Is that?
it probably would be towards the front setback.
I guess what I'm asking is, can they go more than the front setback? Can they go 20 feet from the front lot line to put the garage?
Sure, you can always go further than the setback
You can,
requires.
okay.
Setbacks are just minimums.
Okay.
And it's worth noting that the 20-foot garage setback does come into play here, that garage could not get closer than 20 feet of the front lot line. So you are pushing the house down into the lot further at that point.
Okay.
So on option 2, then with the 20-foot setback, if option 2 were adopted, would a 20-foot setback for a garage at the top or front of the house expand that whole, what you've got here is the dashed 10-foot setback? Would that become 20 feet then, based on this definition?
For the garage, yes. So the garage could be on the side of the house and the front could meet the 10, but it would apply to the garage at least.
But you'd still need a 20-foot setback for the front of the garage, is that right?
Yeah, that won't change either way.
So practically speaking, you'd have to push back either way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
If I may, just add a note there, the garage measurement is actually linear along the driveway, so they could have a serpentine, and we would measure along that serpentine as long as it's 20 feet. So it could look very different.
Commissioners, do you have any recommendations to staff about which of these options you favor?
Can I ask one more question?
Sure.
Can you put the front setback down by the 50 and make the north side, for lack of a better word, the rear setback?
So if we were to do that, you can.
I'm just thinking maybe the whole back is a garage and really the front of the house is, towards the bottom somehow. I don't know. I'm just,
I could say this, the intent is clarifying as part of a housekeeping item. And the exhibits are to help the applicant and the planner define what the setbacks are. Then they go design. There are other elements to consider: mature landscaping, trees, boulders, topography, and aesthetics. And so the front setback is typically associated with how do you get to the front door. If we go beyond that, it's then a policy of a setback number. You decide where the front back is for your design, as long as you meet the number, and then we don't need to define front and rear. You know what I mean? But almost all cities associate the front setback as the first thing to be defined, and it's how do you approach it? How does the mailman get to your, door to drop your package off? Things like that. I've seen I don't think I've seen any that allow the flexibility where you design a structure, determine where do you want the front door to be oriented or the view to be oriented, and then call that direction the front. The design is free to be whatever it wants to be, but the setback is designed for different purposes. Keep you away from your neighbor, give a little light and air.
So, understanding that one is easier to write and explain and the other is more complicated, one maybe is more beneficial to the developers than the other, is one of these materially easier to administer and therefore less confusing than the other?
So, as someone who reviews a lot of single-family building permits, I will say that while we are perfectly capable of explaining the front or the wedged version, it is pretty likely that developers may not get it right the first time, and so that's one more. I get what you could say are frequent flyer comments that are often about explaining our height, for example. Developers sometimes have questions about that, or explaining why impervious and hard surface are different things. this wedge, for the lots this applies to, it's possible that that could become another frequent flyer question, that just is one other thing that stays on a first submission review. So that being said, I don't know that it would really make the total approval time longer, because generally these houses need to go through, 2, maybe 3 revision periods before they're completely ready anyway. And so it's, if we were to choose the more complicated one, it's possible that developers might get it wrong the first time more often, but I don't know that it's really going to delay their time to build, because odds are they were not getting approved on the first go-round anyway. That usually happens mostly with very simple lots and experienced developers.
One thing to add, this helps clarify, the biggest hurdle is somebody that comes in with an innovative idea that works for the site. And the planner says, wow, I like it. Code doesn't say that. It's gray area. Wish I had better code language. This does that. So that solves that hurdle, gives that slight flexibility and clarification. The tool then becomes implemented by handout. You have an exhibit that shows the scenarios of what the setbacks can be. That informs hopefully before they draw it and submit it. So our intent is to, once the code is in place, have a handout, setbacks, et cetera. We have some samples from surrounding cities, and I think that solves that, or hopefully solves that initial implementation drawing problem.
It sounds to me like option 2 creates more flexibility, doesn't create any material administrative challenges, and is better for the landowner in terms of that flexibility. So that seems to make sense to me as a recommendation. I don't know how everybody else feels.
Okay. It seems like option 2 is less flexible. Just in terms of, after you draw the lines, there's less square footage left to work with. Where with option 1, it seems like you have more square footage after you take all the setbacks into account. Am I not seeing that right?
Well, this is just one exhibit that demonstrates how a definition of front yard setback could be implemented. What I've seen over 25 years is that taking a radius, either curve or straight line, from the access easement gives slightly more flexibility to how they design their project. So in general, option 2, whether it's a straight line or a curved line from the end of the access, is slightly better for that flexibility.
Okay.
So then you get
Interesting.
into how do you draw it, how do you word it for every scenario. Potential scenario in this case is if we go with the angled front setback and the most opposite is the 50 feet, what if you get a weird shaped old lot that's 100 and 100, right? In that case, I would say give us the discretion to let them choose, right? What are we trying to achieve? We're not trying to achieve them designing a project on the lot, but having a better design. And by defining it this way, it doesn't change impervious surfaces, lot coverage, FAR, anything like that. It just helps them start site planning based on setbacks, and gives the discretion. This would be that tool. Some cities go a step further, want better design, and their setbacks are defined as director's discretion, right? You'll know it when you see it, and we're not asking for that. That would be beyond a housekeeping cleanup.
So one other, just to piggyback off of that. So I drew this example here to represent a code minimum lot in R6. You could not build a smaller lot than this in this zone. What you would be more likely to find is, say, instead of 50 feet wide, what if it's 70 or 100? As that lot gets wider, the first option will take more, we'll take a square foot for every square foot, or take 10 square feet for every square foot wider that you get. The wedge, on the other hand, will take pretty much the same amount of space no matter what size that lot is. So as the lot gets wider specifically, you gain a lot more flexibility with the wedge option.
And it's nearly impossible in code to codify every scenario. And the intent of this is existing lots, platted previously, not necessarily designed for the future. When a new subdivision comes in, they specify side setbacks, rear setbacks, and that establishes it on the plat. These are for all of the existing lots out there and how to best design and go forward. So we're just asking for that clarity.
So would you like to express an opinion on which you prefer? Commissioners Lowe and Vanetta?
I'll go with option 2.
I think option 2 does provide the flexibility, but I don't really like the idea people need to come in or somehow it's just will not get it right the first time. I guess if there is a way to make it clear for people to do it and do it right, I feel the option 2 can find a way to get there, because it almost sounds like we don't expect people to get it right the first time. It will become some issue, and then there's some 3 revisions after. I just don't really like that, I guess.
We could achieve that. I hate putting pictures in code, right? Text is best. Sometimes an exhibit is worth 1,000 words. So if we come up with this option and can have our codifier include one scenario, but take care of that issue with another instrument, which is the handout,
Yeah.
right? And then those are readily available. It would actually provide clarity, whereas right now, they have to read the existing language, guess at what we're really trying to get at. If they take that flexible option and they're wrong, they have to redesign. That's the bigger fail. And so I think we can go as a service to address your issue through that handout and get the word out. And then architects deal with this all the time, and I would say it actually provides more clarity to them. Every city goes through this problem. They would simply call and say, how do you guys do setbacks? They would have the definition, a neat little exhibit in the code that kind of gets them there, and then a handout that we'd have on the website.
So do you have enough input on that particular one?
I think we've hit it.
All right, let's go on to 13 or 14.
So back to the easy ones. The front setback is directly tied to the front lot line. And so what right now, our definition to some extent restates what front lot line does. And we were thinking that regardless of what option we do or don't choose for front lot line, it would make sense for the front setback to just reference the front lot line, because that's what's happening in either case. That's what happens now, that would happen in either one of these options. And so rather than essentially redefining it or defining the same thing twice, we would just say the front setback is measured from the front lot line as defined in NNC 1806-379.
Any questions on that one? Any questions on any of the other housekeeping amendments? I do have one question on the previous one. when this goes to council, are you going to go with one option? I mean, are you going to remove the options and just make a recommendation, or are you going to ask them to weigh in on both?
That's a good question. We will hold a public hearing, notify Commerce, and then carry forth the record to the city council. To be most inclusive, we carry the whole record, including what was reviewed and decided upon. So ideally, they would see that whole conversation about what the options were, as opposed to just the final option, in this case, option 2 exhibit. This is what the materials show. Your recommendation will be option 2.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Any concluding comments?
Well, that is all of them. I think you could see that we've mostly got a mix of stuff that should have been done already, and definition changes, just tweaks for clarity, and then one at the end that's a little bit meatier, requires a little bit more thought, but on the whole, we don't think that we're radically changing anything with any of these amendments, and that will just make our code a little bit more legible for applicants or for anyone else reading it.
Since it's July, I'll just make one comment now. We don't know what's going to happen after this. One of these amendments arose in September. I came to the city in September, and we were doing the housekeeping ordinance. And in those changes, an issue came up about daycare. We had already held the public hearing. We'd already notified Commerce, and it was a little late in the game to add another housekeeping item. That may happen again this time. Our intent is to do all the housekeeping items that we know about. These are those. Before we notify Commerce and before we hold a public hearing, if there are any others that are of the easy category that we can add now, I'd like the flexibility to add them, as opposed to we're out of the gate, no more suggestions. So if anyone sees this on YouTube or anything, we're not at a public hearing. If there are easy typographical issues and so forth, Planning Commission can consider them. We could add them. We have the bandwidth to do that. But the further we get down the road, it becomes, thank you for your comment. We will start a list for next year's housekeeping. And I don't want to define what that point is right now, but obviously after the public hearing or when the draft ordinance is being reviewed and acted upon at City Council, that's too late. So I just put that out there that the gate's not closed, but it soon will be. Thank you.
I wanted to thank staff for their work on this. This issue has such a plebeian name, the housekeeping, amendments. But I always love the fact that every year the code gets a little clearer for people, for the citizens to use it, and things get a little more efficient for staff to administer it, and that's a small thing of beauty. And also, staff did a nice job getting all this complicated stuff, making it explainable and helping us get through it in a very efficient way. So thank you very much. We are now at our second public comment period. No one has joined us in City Hall chambers. Has anybody joined online? Okay, then we'll close that public comment period. Planning calendar, our next meeting is, there are 5 Wednesdays in August, so it's August 23rd is our next meeting. I'm wondering if that is another concert? No, it isn't. The concerts will be done by then. So the only other item on the planning calendar is that from here, some of us are going to go over and listen to music and man the booth again and do the penny poll. So hope to see some of you over there. And with that, we will adjourn tonight's meeting.